Pleased to say that the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, is joining us now. Good morning to you. Thanks.
Good morning, Kay.
So much to talk about, so little time to do it. Let's go straight into Shamima Begum, should we? She's the IS bride. She wants to be a Brit again. Why won't we let her?
Well, it's difficult for me to comment, I'm afraid, Kay, because we're waiting for the court's judgment later today. Once we hear that, then I'm happy to come on your programme and speak to you. But I do think as a fundamental principle, there will be cases, rare cases, but there will be cases where people do things and make choices which undermine the UK interest to such an extent that it is right for the Home Secretary to have the power to remove their passport. We'll have to see whether the court ultimately supports the decision of the former Home Secretary to do that in this case.
Is there ever room to reconsider, though, when teenagers make bad mistakes?
Well, I think you should always have an open mind, but it depends on the scale of the mistake and the harm that that individual did or could have done to UK interests abroad. But as I said, I don't want to comment too much on this case, if that's OK, because we'll find out later today what the court's decision was.
Something you might want to talk about is Brexit. Are we doing a Swiss-style Brexit?
No, we're not. We have a settled position. There was a long debate, as you well recall, and there were respectable arguments on both sides as to the degree of relationship that we had with the European Union. But we chose one in 2019 and 2020 when Boris Johnson signed the deal with the European Union, which was very clear. There wouldn't be jurisdiction of European judges in the UK, we wouldn't be paying money to the European Union, and there wouldn't be freedom of movement. And those fundamental principles are the ones that will govern our relationship going forward. So I don't know where the story came from in the Sunday papers. It's not one that we recognise, and we're going to stick with the relationship that we've secured. That doesn't mean that we're not interested in improving our trading relations with the European Union, or indeed, in my sphere, our security and migration partnership with the European Union, as you saw with the deal that we were able to strike with the French recently. But we're not going to reopen the discussions that we had a few years ago. We have a settled view and we're moving forwards on that basis.
So could we potentially restart payments to the EU in order to improve that trade deal?
No, we've no intention of doing that. As I said, money, free movement, jurisdiction of European judges, these are really important things that were discussed at length within the Conservative Party, within the country a few years ago. We chose our position. I think it's broadly the right one because we did that for a reason. We did that so that the UK, the fifth largest economy in the world, wasn't subject to foreign judges or rules and regulations coming out of the European Union and could embrace the opportunities that came with Brexit. And you heard in the budget the Chancellor saying that we would be doing that in crucial areas for the British economy, like life sciences, like green technologies, like advanced manufacturing and financial services. And that really should be our focus right now. How do you grow the British economy and ensure that we are one of the most innovative countries in the world, using our ability to set our own laws at a faster pace and in a smarter way than a big trading bloc like the European Union is able to do.
So the head of the CBI says in order to improve growth, we need to increase migration.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. We listen to the business community, obviously, and we're aware of certain skills shortages, and we want a pragmatic, sensible relationship with business. You see that in some of the visas that we've established in recent years, like the health and social care visa, for example, that's enabled thousands of doctors and nurses and care workers to come into the country to help support the NHS. But overall, our ambition is to reduce net migration. We think that's what the British public want. That was one of the driving forces in the vote to leave the European Union back in 2016. And it's simply not true to say that we've adopted a sort of closed-door approach since then. In fact, last year, 300,000 work visas were issued for people to come into this country. They were issued to people who had a certain living standard, so they could look after themselves and not rely too heavily on the state. And they were issued to people who were working in what we call shortage occupations. I think that's the right approach, rather than drawing on lower-skilled workers. If I was a business manager, I would be looking to the British workforce in the first instance, seeing how I could get local people into my business, train them up, skill them to do the job. And remember, Kay, there are 5 million economically inactive people in this country, and the government's first duty is to help as many of them as possible into the workforce.
Do you listen to the British people?
I hope so. That's my job as a politician.
OK, 54% say that Brexit was a mistake.
Well, that's a poll that you're referring to there, and polls obviously do come and go. The most important vote was the one that happened back in 2016 when the public voted to leave the European Union. I don't think if you asked people, would you like to go through the disruption and the challenges that happened when we were debating when and how to leave the European Union all over again, my priority now as a member of the government is to help this country through a cost of living crisis, ensure that we grow the economy, and to tackle big issues like the migrant crisis in the Channel, like public services.
I'm glad you brought that up. What's going on with this chap that died at Manston?
Well, it was very sad, obviously, as anybody's death was. But as far as we know, and it's now a matter for the coroner and the independent investigator called the IOPC, who the Home Office have referred the case to, as far as we know, this is an individual who got unwell on arrival in the UK, or was unwell before he arrived in. Not because of the conditions at Manston. Well, the coroner will investigate that, and so I don't want to prejudge that. But from what we know today, he certainly did not have an infectious disease like diphtheria, as has been suggested in the press.
OK. Talk to me about little our Ishak, 2 years old. His family complain about mould even before he's born, and he dies because of mould and his housing association home. How could... I mean, that was under your watch. How could that happen?
Yeah, I think it's a desperately sad case, and it shows that some social housing, and in fact it's not related to social housing because the evidence suggests that the private rental sector actually has on average lower standards than the social rented sector. So housing more generally, there are unfortunately far too many properties in this country that don't meet a decent standard. We've done a number of things in recent years to try to tackle that. Hopefully the most important one will be creating a new regulator for social housing. I established that as Housing Secretary. It's now being legislated for by my successor, Michael Gove, in the House of Commons. That will ensure that residents' voices are heard, because one of the things we learnt, for example, in the Grenfell tragedy was that too many people who live in social housing feel ignored, as if they don't matter, and their social housing providers...
Why 2 years? Why did it take so long?
Well, we've established a regulator, we've established an entire new regulatory regime, which is all about ensuring that people who are residents in social housing, council housing or housing associations can actually have their voices heard and their complaints properly investigated.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I mean, I've been looking at some of the big earners in the paper this morning. Former boss of Anchor Housing, £592,000. Should these people be getting that sort of
No,
money?
I don't think they should be. And when I was Housing Secretary, I called that out repeatedly. Housing associations, I think in some cases, have moved away from their charitable and social purposes and have become too large, not sufficiently focused on the interests and needs of the resident where it began. And as you say, some of the executive pay is off the charts. That needs to change. Michael Gove, I think this week, has written to all the social housing providers in the country, raising that case and saying that they need to improve standards and refocus on where social housing began, which was providing decent quality housing to people who are more vulnerable in society, rather than becoming large businesses that are out of touch.
We're out of time, but I'm sure you'll be watching the England game later on. How will you feel if they take the knee?
I'm fine with that. I think that that's a choice for Harry Kane and the team, as indeed for Wales as well. These are their choices. It's not for the government to tell them what to do. And I think when you're playing in a country like Qatar, which does have different standards in the way it treats, for example, the LGBTQ community, it's perfectly legitimate for the England or Welsh team to make that stand.
It's amazing to talk to you. It's been too long. Thanks for coming in. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Jenrick.